So I rewatched the Final Destination, which is the fourth Final Destination movie, and I've reviewed it on this channel already a long time ago. But I really wanted to talk about it again because this is a movie that gets a lot of flack for being really, really bad. And rewatching this movie, honestly, I want to talk about how this movie is incredibly exploitive, but to me, this is just so entertaining in a way where the exploitation aspect to me is so over the top, where it's like a really perfect balance of exploitation as opposed to being just really stupid. And it is stupid, I'm not denying that at all. It is the dumbest movie easily in the franchise, and I love all five of these movies. But man, rewatching this, there was a lot I wanted to talk about. This movie, the other movies do focus on like puns about death, like before they die. Like there's always lines where it's like, I'm gonna do this if it kills me, or like your life, you've got your whole life ahead of you, like lines like that throughout this franchise. But this is extremely just ridiculous with all of the death motifs in this movie, where whenever they're on the racetrack at the beginning, Nick sees a shirt, and a guy has a shirt that says, on the back of a shirt, it says, "Life's a bitch and then you die." And then after the wreck, or after the crash, they go to a place called Death by Caffeine. That's really, like, Death by Caffeine. Like, that to me, it was so, like, I laughed out loud because it was so ridiculous in the fact that this is a movie about death. This is a movie about people dying after escaping death. And the other movies, yeah, had a lot of unsettled moments of saying that, but this one in particular, they go to a coffee shop called Death by Caffeine, and everything on the menu is death, named with death puns. Wow, just, it's insane. And then the fact that this one, in a lot of ways, it feels like they don't care. Like, watching this one, and this is directed by David R. Ellis, who directed the second one as well, which is my favorite out of all of them. And this is my least favorite, and by that I mean I still love it. I still do love this movie, but there's a scene where it really shows that this is just pure exploitation, where the racist guy, whenever he gets killed, he gets dragged with a hook by his truck, while on the radio it sings "Why Can't We Be Friends?" That's playing on the radio while he's being dragged down the street and lit on fire. That to me just was so funny, but it was just so ridiculous. I was just sitting there like, wow, we have reached a peak of difference between the other movies, even though the other movies have so many oblivious like lines about death. This one has so many ridiculous things like that. And another point in this movie, as opposed to all the other movies, you can argue this differently, but in this movie, for me, the acting was really, really subpar as opposed to the other movies. The acting in this is really weird. Like, it's almost like a soap opera drama movie. Like, with the way that these characters act in this movie is so strange and so different from the other movies. And these characters are the most cliched in the whole franchise, and this is a franchise that is easily can be debunked as cliched throughout, because all these characters are basic character tropes in horror movies. But in this one, these characters are ridiculously cliched, but in a way where I thought was so laughably fun. Like, Nick is just the basic one who sees the visions. There's nothing else to him. Laurie is just the girlfriend who is the believing one, the one who believes him. And then you got Hunt, who's the douchebag. And then you've got Janet, who's the worried one. And then you've got MILF. And yes, in the credits, her name is MILF/Samantha. So her real name's Samantha, but they chose to put MILF before her real name. So this character is named MILF, the one who gets a rock thrown in her eye. They didn't even want to name her. And then you've got a mechanic who's called the mechanic. And then you got the racist who's the racist. And all of these tropes are just, these characters are just nothing. And it's so, I think it's honestly commendable how they didn't care in this movie. They just made these characters just what they were. They were nothing more. Like, the racist says the N-word, and that's it. And then the mechanic does mechanic stuff and is a douchebag. And then the MILF, Samantha, is just the woman who, like, goes and gets her hair done. And then that's it. Like, it's just ridiculous how these characters are just cliches. Like, they're nothing more than just this. And it's so weird. And also, George is the nice security guy. And that's it. Like, there's nothing else. This movie felt so self-aware in a way where, like, they know what they're doing, but they're doing it in a more exploitive and dumb way than the other movies. Like, for example, there's a scene where Janet gives, like, this homeless guy some coins, because he's like, can you help me out? And she's like, sure. And she gives him a couple coins, and then he says to his dog, all right, Brownie, let's see what we got here. And then he goes, oh, a penny? That's some bullshit. And then he just throws it. And then the scene ends. What was the point of that scene? Except for it was pretty funny, because it's just ridiculous that we have that in the movie. There were comedic moments in the other movies too, but that moment in particular, I laughed, but I'm just like, this is so weird. But I appreciate that they put in this weird shit in the movie, like, randomly. They honestly probably put that scene in there to pad their runtime, because this movie is only an hour and 21 minutes. It is a quick set, and it is so fun. Also, I haven't even mentioned yet, the shitty CGI and 3D effects make this movie immediately the most dated out of all 5 of the movies, because they just look so terrible. They stand out so terribly, in which you look at it like it's something out of the 80s, where, like, it stands out because of the ridiculousness of it. And it's so weird too, because the first 3 movies did have some CGI, but they were more on practical effects, especially the second movie, even though they added in CG, but not enough to overtake the practical effects for the most part. 3 did a little bit of both, but, like, the first 2 especially were more practical. And 3 was practical, but not as much. It was kind of like an in-between. But what I'm saying is the first 3 are way more practical than this one, where it was just really shitty CGI effects that really make this movie dated. But honestly, that gave it an identity for me, like, to make it really stand out in how ridiculous it is. And now I talked about the characters, now let's get into the lines of the movie. The dialogue in this movie is the dialogue from the other 3 movies, the first 3 movies, because literally these lines feel like they're verbatim, just brought back, and, like, the whole script feels like it's brought back from the other 3 movies, where, like, there are lines where, like, they're just repeating scenes from the other movies. Like, whenever George is the next one to go, he says, well, that means I'm next. And that's a line that Nora says in Final Destination 2. She says, well, if this happens, then that means I'm next. Like, it's the same line. Not exactly worded the same, but it is the same line. And then after that, Laurie says, no, George, you can't give up. And, like, that line is from the other movies as well. And then there's a scene, because it's repeating the other movies, where George tries to hang himself, and he can't, because he's not the next in line to die. And there he says, like, I've been trying to kill myself all day. And it's a funny, unintentional line. I mean, it's a very, I feel like, intentional, funny line, because he says that in such a way where it has to be. I've been trying to kill myself all day, like, come on. But I do love that line, and I love how ridiculous it is. And again, it's just repeating the second movie again, where Eugene, like, tried to shoot himself, and he couldn't because he wasn't next to die. But again, so many references to 2. I know they reference all 3 of the other movies, but 2 especially, because the same director directed 2. But really, really just hilarious lines, because they're basically lines from the other movies. There's also some, again, this is such a weird self-aware movie, where there's a line that George and Nick are talking in the elevator, and there's, like, a crowd of people in this elevator right next to them hearing this every word, and they're talking about how they're on death's list, and George says, yeah, that must have been why I couldn't kill myself earlier. And then nobody even looked at them, and nobody reacted. And then there was one woman on the one side who made kind of like a sly shade look, and then that's it. She didn't even speak to him. These people literally hear that he was talking about killing himself, and no one bats an eye. And I know it's got to be in a self-aware way because nobody looked at him except for one girl who kind of gave him the side eye, like, what? But, like, it's ridiculous, and it just cracks me up how this movie feels so ridiculous and exploitive, which they don't care, it felt like, with stuff like that. Or maybe they were so smart and they were like, oh, this is what people would be like in real life if you said you were going to commit suicide and nobody listened. Maybe? I think I'm giving them too much credit on this. Later in the movie, towards the end, whenever we're getting to the big mall premonition scene, Laurie is starting to see things, like see signs, like Nick did. She starts seeing signs. And there is a hilarious scene where she's on the escalator, and like she and Janet are on there, and her shoelace gets caught. Her shoelace gets caught in the elevator, and then she's like, oh no, my shoelace is caught, it's twisting my leg, and like, they get to the top of the elevator, and then it just pops off, and like, it was such a pathetic moment of like, trying to add tension, where she's like, oh my god, my shoelace is stuck, it's twisting my foot, and then like, a second later, the shoelace pops. And it's just there to try to add tension, but it doesn't work. But it is so hilarious. Like that scene in particular, I just sat there like, oh my god, that's just so, they're stretching so far. And also the fact that this movie, even though the third movie did this too, this one has a second full premonition, but this one is a way longer premonition where it's the second premonition is at the mall, and so Nick encounters all this. He encounters everybody dying, and then he goes back in to save Laurie and Janet and everybody. But this goes on for like 10 or 15 minutes for this premonition, and then it's so ridiculous because we had a first premonition. I know 3 did that with the train at the end, but it wasn't as long. And in this, it's just so funny with how ridiculous this mall massacre thing is, where like everything just starts blowing up. Like Laurie gets like pushed through the elevator and like gets crushed in the elevator, and it's ridiculous. And like Janet gets impaled by stuff in the movie. Whenever the explosion in the movie happens, then it actually explodes. It's so funny. It's so ridiculous, and it's so funny because we have a big second premonition. So Laurie, Janet, and Nick all like die like 3 times, 3 different ways in this movie. And if you don't think that's exploitive, seeing these characters die 3 times in the movie, in this hour and 20-minute movie, it's just so ridiculous. But honestly, all those points I just mentioned made me really, really enjoy this because it is so stupid and so over the top. But man, I had so much fun watching this movie. I really loved it on rewatch because it is so ridiculous and just so over the top. And there's so many things about this movie that just made me laugh and made me go, wow, this is just exploitation at its finest. It really is the most exploitive Final Destination movie, with everything, without shot, with the acting, with the bad CGI. Like, it really works on being so bad, but so good. I really enjoyed this on rewatch, and I'm glad I got to talk about this again. So, do you agree with me? Tell me down in the comments how you feel about the Final Destination. You might just hate it. I can see that completely. I can understand why you would completely think that. But man, for me, this is a fun rewatch. So, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later.